Clerk of Parliament, is the next witness ready? Okay, please bring him online. Okay. Good morning. For the record, could you please state your name and the position that you hold in your organization?
My name is Ben Nimmo. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab.
Thank you. The evidence which you will be giving today before the committee will be taken on affirmation. The clerk will now administer the affirmation.
Please raise your right hand. Please repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Ben Nimmo,
Do solemnly,
do solemnly,
sincerely,
sincerely,
and truly declare
and truly declare
and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. You may lower your arm.
Welcome to the public hearing of the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. And I'll now call upon Minister Shanmugam to begin.
Morning, Mr. Nimmo. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Okay. You have a report that you've given us and a longer report that I think you put into the UK Parliament. And we will try and refer to both of them. First, your report. You start out by putting out your position as a Senior Fellow, Information Defense, Atlantic Council, Digital Forensic Research Lab. Would you tell us a little bit about your background? I understand you've also been a journalist in the past.
That's right. I worked as a journalist for the German press agency, DPA, from about 2006 till 2011. I was initially based in the Baltic states and then covering the EU and NATO in Brussels. And then from 2011 to 14, I was a press officer at NATO, largely responsible for issues relating to Russia and Ukraine.
Thank you very much. In the first page, you make a number of points. You put paragraph numbers. You start with paragraph 1, where you talk about use of falsehoods is older than history. And we refer to the Indian text Arthashastra. But the internet has, of course, made a change to this whole process. And you say that they've had 5 main effects on the process. First, the number of platforms and channels have increased radically. Right? On Facebook alone, the number of active monthly users grew from more than 100 million in 2008 to more than 2 billion by the last quarter of last year, correct?
That's correct.
Then you talk about the low cost of creating an online platform, which has made it far easier for falsehoods to be spread. And third, the social media allowing peer-to-peer interactions in an unprecedented scale, which allows malicious actors to bypass traditional reporting outlets without adhering to traditional editorial standards. And fourth, the borderless nature of the internet. I think over the page, fifth, the modern editorial techniques have all made it much easier to create and propagate and have a very wide reach for malicious, false content, correct?
That's correct.
And it has also made it much easier to create false stories, from what you say.
Yes, that's right.
Now, if we now look at paragraph 16, you divide the motivations into 3 categories: mischief, money, political influence. And in your view, in paragraph 18, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. A lot of fakes are created for money. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Something we saw in the US election cycle in particular, which I'll refer to because it's been particularly well documented, is that there were groups of individuals around the world who were using the power of the internet in general, and particularly of Google and Facebook and their advertising systems. And they were writing stories which were deliberately false about the political campaign and about the candidates. And the sole purpose was to generate income from getting advertising clicks. And therefore, their incentive was to write stories which would be popular, which would spread very widely, which would generate lots of clicks, because there was a direct correlation between the number of clicks and the amount of money they would make. Because this was entirely commercially driven, there was no intrinsic political bias in the actors themselves, and there are documented cases where some of these fake news merchants started off by writing lots of stories, positive stories about Hillary Clinton, realizing that nobody was picking up on sharing them, writing negative stories about Clinton and realizing that those were being spread much more. These were all works of fiction. So if you like, it's a fiction market. And the indicator of success is the number of clicks you get. And then they're reacting to those clicks and seeing what stories spread best and then trying to replicate those stories. So it was very much a black market driven economy, if you like. But it was based on creating works of, creating works of fiction, passing them off as news and spreading them around to get lots of clicks.
Thank you. And you say in paragraph 24 that there is a category of authors of false stories who are politically motivated, and they can be internal to a country or external. Would you help us with that? Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Okay, so if you like, the most direct reason for writing a false story about a political situation is if you are involved in that political situation. You either want to support a candidate or you want to denigrate a candidate. And one way of doing so is to make up a story, to make up something which is completely false and try and spread that as far as possible. We saw that again a lot in the US election, and again I refer to that because it's been so well documented. But there were conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton in particular, which were entirely fabricated. They were based on leaked documents which were then misinterpreted and deliberately distorted to say something which the documents did not say. But these were being created by opponents of Hillary Clinton in the United States, not official opponents. These were largely online activists whose self-perception was that they could gain more power and more influence by spreading false stories online. And so they were, again, making up stories about Clinton. What we also saw in combination that was the activity of the various troll factories in Russia, which were also slanting and making up attacks on Clinton. So for the political purpose of denigrating Clinton and weakening her candidacy. So there you have both an internal group and an external group who modus operandi is the same. They are both making up false stories about a candidate in order to weaken them. And they're using very much the same networks and techniques.
Thank you. If we look at paragraph 28 over the page, you refer to thousands of Twitter and Facebook accounts which appear to belong to members of the alternate right, and opposed to the Black Lives Matter campaign. And you say that these were in fact run from a troll factory or IRA in St. Petersburg. The purpose is also to deepen the divides between the African American community and the police, and to attack the police as an institution.
That's right. And if you look at the whole span of the Russian operation, the troll farm operation from 2014 to 17, it had several purposes. What the most direct was to attack Hillary Clinton. As the campaign evolved, it became more and more directly supporting Donald Trump as well. But at the same time as that was going on, you also had a systematic attempt to further inflame already inflamed social divides in the US. And there were a number of different communities which were targeted for this. A lot of effort was put into the Black Lives Matter campaign and to widening the divide between Black Lives Matter and the police. So, for example, the Troll Factory was running Instagram accounts which were in favor of Black Lives Matter, and it was running Instagram accounts which were arguing in favor of the police and the right to shoot Black Lives Matter. So it was pushing both sides. In the same way on gun control, when you had, for example, the San Bernardino mass shooting in California on the 3rd of December 2015, you had accounts from the Troll Factory on Twitter which used the occasion to push for gun control. And you had accounts from the Troll Factory also on Twitter which were using the occasion to argue that gun control is pointless and you should have more guns. And so right the way through, from the very start, there was an attempt to further polarize already polarized communities. And one of the very first deliberate fakes which the Troll Factory published was on the 13th of December 2014, so going back a very long way. And this was a fake video which purported to show the moment when an African-American woman was shot by a policeman in Atlanta, Georgia. So already in December 2014, only a few months into the operation, that kind of message was already being amplified and created.
And you've given some numbers in paragraph 29. You say that Troll Factory managed at least 3,814 troll accounts and over 50,000 bot accounts, and more than 1.4 million American users are known to have interacted with these accounts in some way. And according to Facebook, the Troll Factory ran at least 470 accounts, spent 100,000 in advertising, and the posts reached 126 million Americans. That's extensive reach for a relatively small sum of money.
It is, and this goes back to the point that I made in the early paragraphs about the relative cheapness of doing this. It was a long-running campaign. Not all those engagements would have been positive. Some of the engagements would have been genuine American internet users pushing back. But for a relatively small sum up front, they did achieve a very large reach, and we still don't have the full picture. We still don't have a complete list of every single account run by the Troll Factory. As of October 2017, a Russian investigative journalism outlet called RBK did a long report exposing some of the workings of the troll farm, and they interviewed current trolls after Facebook and Twitter had shut down a lot of the accounts that we know about, and the trolls said, we still have accounts which reach 1 million people. So even after the different rounds of shutdowns which have gone on, as far as we know, the troll farm teams are still working. They still have accounts, and so the challenge now is to find those accounts.
Yes. Can we look at paragraphs 33 and 34, and can you explain those two paragraphs a little bit to us, please?
Say again, sorry? I was
paragraphs 33 and 34, can you tell us a little bit more about what you say there?
So on social media, fake accounts are the foot soldiers of the information campaign, and they are used in two main ways. They can be used to create a message. This would be the troll accounts. They'll masquerade as somebody who is a member of the target population. They will try and infiltrate that target population by interacting with genuine members of the community. they will try and build up a following in that group, and then they can try and insert their biased or false information into that group in order to try and influence it, steer it in a particular political direction. You also have the bot accounts, which are mostly or entirely automated, and they're used as amplifiers. There's a well-known bot user in the American alt-right who is on the record as saying all you need is about 1,000 bots. If you use those to give a tweet 1,000 retweets, then genuine users will look at it and think that that must be a credible tweet, and therefore they are more likely to share it. And so the bots serve as an amplifier, and they serve as an extra badge of authentication and amplification for individual posts. And then you have the bots and the trolls working together to create divisive messages or political messages, push them out into the larger ecosystem.
Thank you. In paragraph 42, you bring it to Singapore, you give your views. You say that for Singapore, political debates, moments of tension between ethnic, religious, and political groups, demonstrations and security incidents are all events which are at risk of large-scale false information or false accounts by domestic or foreign actors. And longer-term operations typically focus on promoting or attacking a particular point of view. Now, taking the Singapore situation into account, a multi-religious, multiracial society, can you tell us how a longer-term operation might take place?
Yes, I would expect a longer-term operation to follow roughly the lines we saw with the troll farm in St. Petersburg, which is not to say that it would be coming from St. Petersburg, but that seems to be an effective model which is likely to be copied. And so what you would have would have one or a number of target communities, and the question would be whether the manipulator is trying to set all the communities against each other, or whether they're trying to radicalize one particular community. But for each community, you would have the creation of a number of social media accounts across all platforms. So you'd need to be looking at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, every possible platform. They would be masquerading as members of that community. They would be trying to interact with genuine leading members of the community. So for example, on Twitter, if they made a post, they would tag leading members of the community. And the hope would then be that leading members of the community would retweet or share or amplify that post. And by so doing, the genuine leading members of the community will be validating the identity of the fake account. They will effectively be saying, look, this is an account which is worth following. This is an account which it's okay to interact with. You'd get that on a large scale. And initially, it's likely that the majority of the posts would be innocuous. For example, in the Russian operation against the US, a lot of the impersonation accounts, the known Russian troll accounts, were posting about how much they love the American flag, or how much they wish that all the American soldiers could come home for Christmas. And they were posting heartwarming stories about how wonderful the police are and how effective the American military are. Good, strong, patriotic stuff. And then into that mix, they would start inserting, oh, and incidentally, Hillary Clinton is the source of all evil in the world. Or the only way to protect this is to vote for Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. Or if they were targeting the Black Lives Matter, they would be saying the only thing that you can do is go out on the streets and protest against the police, or you need to have a gun as well. So they would start off with very heartwarming and positive messaging, and then they would start to insert the negative messaging. And so by that, it's a process of infiltration. It's making your account accepted in the community, and once you're accepted, you can become more and more vocal and aggressive, and you can try and trigger people's negative emotions. And if you're successful in that combination, then certainly what we saw in the Russian case was that some of the leading Russian accounts were actually more effective at representing the alt-right than the alt-right were. And there are cases where you've had genuine US mainstream news outlets doing an article on, here is what Twitter is saying about the latest political controversy. And and they'd quote two voices from the alt-right and two voices from the political left, and both alt-right voices were Russian trolls. So actually, the Russian trolls were the spokespeople of the alt-right movement in the United States in those stories.
Right.
And that shows you how effective this campaign can be.
Yes. Now, you talked about Russia, but presumably this technology, methodology, nothing secret about it, and much smaller countries can access these methods of infiltration and
that's
targeting.
Right. That's right. I mean, what you need is a building with a lot of computers and internet connections, appropriate VPN masking, fake phone numbers so you can create accounts, and then enough people to do the job. It's not an expensive prospect, and it's not a particularly high-tech prospect. And particularly what we're also seeing now is commercial botnets, which are particularly on Twitter, Twitter is the most transparent platform, so we have the most data on what's going on there, and so it's the easiest to track. But you have commercial groups which will create thousands or tens of thousands of bots, and then they will be available for hire. So anybody anywhere in the world who wants to make their social media account look more important can buy 10,000 followers or 1,000 retweets or 500 likes for Bitcoin or through an online transaction. And so even if a small group doesn't have the capability to create its own botnet, it can rent a botnet for the occasion. And we've seen in many countries there have been reports of troll factories being operated. There have been reports from Mexico, from Venezuela. There are indications that there's been troll farm activity in Saudi Arabia and Qatar in the row between them. There was certainly very large-scale bot activity in the row between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So this is certainly not a Russia-centric problem. That, as I said, I've been referring to Russia a lot because it's so well documented. And the problem in a lot of this is the documentation is not there. So Russia is a good case study, but the methods it uses are methods which pretty well anybody could use.
Thank you. Now, could you look at paragraph 45 and tell us a little bit about that, please?
What we saw in the Morgan Freeman case was that, and it's a very useful case study because it's quite small, but it contains all the ingredients. So it's a microcosm of the situation. The American actor Morgan Freeman did the voice and face of a US video saying that Russia had attacked America in 2016 during the presidential campaign with its online activity. This created a backlash on social media, which was launched by a group which called itself an independent group of Russian activists and patriots, called Agitpolk, which means the agitation regiment. They launched a hashtag called Stop Morgan Lie. The hashtag was then picked up by, it was pushed out by anonymous internet trolls. It was amplified by bots. It was then picked up by official Russian diplomatic missions, such as the Russian embassy in South Africa and the Russian consulate general in Geneva. And it was then reported on by RT, Russia's Day TV. RT pitching it as, here is a big Twitter movement with an outcry, was the word they used. Whereas, in fact, the total Twitter traffic in English was about 1,000 posts, which is statistically irrelevant on Twitter. But what research has then showed is that the Agitpolk group, which started this Twitter movement, was not a group of independent activists. It was the troll factory. And we know that because all the Agitpolk Twitter accounts featured on the list which has been published of troll factory accounts. So you have a situation in which a hashtag is created by the troll factory, launched online by trolls, amplified by bots, further amplified by embassies and consulate generals, and then turned into a story by a state broadcaster. Each step of the chain is claiming that it's doing this purely independently, but in fact they're all singing from the same sheet.
Thank you. At paragraph 46, you refer to Singapore. You say that election campaigns and tensions between different social, religious, political, economic, and ethnic groups are likely to be the main targets of any such attempts, as the campaigns tend to gradually inflame tensions and hollow out the political center at the expense of the fringes. What you're really saying is such campaigns eventually, over time, move the middle ground by making them angry and push them to the make them angry and push them to either side of the political spectrum. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that's correct. And it seems that the intent is to make as many people as possible as angry as possible, partly because when people are angry, they're easier to manipulate. And their critical faculties for analyzing information will be reduced,
right?
And partly to make the target harder to govern. The more you have people shouting and screaming at each other, the less easy it is to have a sensible debate.
Right. Can I now refer you, Mr. Nimmo, to the report which is attached as an appendix to the submission to this select committee? You've got you start with an executive summary, and in the second page of that executive summary, you've got it as a series of bullet points. I want to go to the second page of the executive summary. Right at the top, the first bullet point, you make the point that fake news stories are spread for different reasons, including commercial, ideological, political, and for the purposes of destabilization. We have seen that. And then you make the point, social media and search engines can legitimately be expected to legislate against large-scale automated distribution networks which use large numbers of fake accounts to propagate a message. And you also say search engines and aggregator sites can legitimately be required to block or remove content which is demonstrably false and to flag sites and users which regularly post false content. I mean, we can go through the others as well, but essentially your point is these steps can be taken, right?
Yes, these steps can be taken, and in fact, since I drafted this, Twitter has come out with a change to its terms of service, which it announced on the 28th of February this year.
Thank you.
Which was making it harder to making it easier for Twitter to take action against large-scale automation and copying and pasting the same language through multiple accounts.
All right.
So these are areas in which it can be done, and in my opinion, it is legitimate to engage with the platforms on this point. If you have one single person managing 100,000 accounts, that's not in anybody's interest. So that's a point where it is, I would say, it's legitimate to engage with the different platforms and say, this is the situation. It would be appropriate to take action on this.
Thank you. Now, if we go to paragraph 17, you refer to the Lisa case and you refer to the false claim that the Scottish referendum did not meet international standards. We don't need to go through it. I think these are well known. But the Lisa case, in your view, in paragraph 18, illustrates the factors required for a successful fake. It has got to be an emotional subject. The language has got to be emotional. It has to gain a veneer of authority by interviewing people close to the girl at the center of the case. And it has to be broadcast on a medium that looks legitimate. But even though it had all these facts, it was an entirely false story, wasn't it?
It was 90% false. The nuance in the Lisa case is that the original falsehood was not made up by the Russian media. It was a lie told by the girl herself. So as far as we know, she made up the story which she told her parents, that she had been abducted and raped by men of Middle Eastern appearance. Whereas in fact she'd run away from home, or she decided not to go home for the night because she'd had bad marks at school, and she'd gone and stayed at a friend's place. So the story was false from the start. What happened was that the Russian language media, the Russian state media, picked up on the story and interviewed various apparent members of the Russian community in Germany who said, this is what happened, and we know it happened because Lidl says so, and therefore the police are covering it up. What then happened was the Berlin police issued a statement saying, we've heard these stories, we've seen the chatter on social media, there was no abduction and there was no rape. We have checked, we have interviewed the girl. Now at that point, the responsible German media just dropped the story. Once the Berlin police have said nothing happened, you don't have a story. The behavior of the Russian state media was to take this as evidence that the police were covering up. And so effectively what the Russian state media were doing at this point was taking the word of a teenage girl and saying, this is more credible than an official statement from the Berlin official police. And then kept on running that story for several weeks until the Russian foreign minister himself propagated the story in a press conference, at which point the German foreign ministry intervened. So the story was false. The initial Russian language reporting was based on the girl's false statement.
Thank you.
So that's the nuance there.
We will now go into some of the, material that you have attached to your appendix. Can I refer you to the incidents you've put in on the Catalan incident, Maldito Bulo's error? Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah.
Now,
I don't. If we could have it on screen, that would be appreciated.
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
You say that there was an error by Bulo, minor one, understandable. And on the same day, someone shared a photo of police pushing back against demonstrators under an enormous Catalan flag. So if you see over the page, you'll see the flag. That was, the image of the flag was photoshopped, wasn't it?
That's right, yes.
Because we can see that from the next page, where you have a crowd of demonstrators, no flag. But the original Bulo tweet was retweeted 3,700 times. The fake was retweeted 12,600 times.
Mm-hmm.
So even though Bulo corrected version and said, put out a tweet, the fake had almost 4 times the number of the truth. And you say that shows the difficulty of fake busting in such a heated and viral information environment. People just don't want to believe the truth. They prefer to believe the lie, particularly if it plays into their emotions. Would that be a fair categorization?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And the most difficult problem in the whole debate on online falsehood and what to do about it is the problem of the willing audience. People who are emotionally invested in believing that the fake is actually true and therefore willing to share it. Or even a case, you also have fake cases where people will knowingly share a false story because they think that serves some higher purpose. For example, again, coming back to the US election, that there is indicative evidence that a lot of the people who were sharing some of the attacks on Hillary Clinton didn't actually believe them, but they hoped that other people would. And the higher purpose was to prevent Clinton becoming president. So you have both the emotional investment into wanting to believe the story, and you have the emotional investment into wanting to spread the story, even though the belief is that it's false, because that will serve some what's seen as higher purpose.
Right. Let me now take you to another article you have, which is the Vesti report, Russia's fake electronic bomb. I'm trying to do this as quickly as I can. We'll flash it on the screen. There was a sensational headline that Russia boasts it can wipe out the entire US Navy with an electronic bomb as war fears grow. Right? I think you're well aware of this.
Yes, this is one of my favorite stories.
Yes, and within hours, because it was so sensational, it was picked up by the British tabloids, Daily Express, Fox News, they all printed this. And we see that over the page, Daily Express. And there is an interesting diagram that you have drawn over the page. Can you explain this diagram to us, please?
So this diagram is showing the spread of the story from the insertion point, which was Russian state TV, through the different websites which picked up on it. Because what we saw was that the original story was picked up by a number of outlets, including the tabloids. And then the tabloids became, if you like, secondary amplifiers. And so a third stage of outlets would pick up the story because they had seen it in, let's say, the Daily Express. But they would attribute it to the Daily Express. So you have the Daily Express attributing the story to Viesti, to Russian TV. Then other sites will attribute it to the Daily Express. And then in some cases, further sites still picked up on the sites which were quoting the Daily Express. And so you have a knock-on effect.
Yes.
That you have an initial impact and then a second order and third order and fourth order impact as it spreads through more and more sites.
You say that the Fox News version was shared over 27,000 times, mostly on Facebook, and the Sun article, same piece, was shared over 10,000 times. So the reach was immense, wasn't it?
That's right, and something we see a lot in the online information is that it will deliberately target mainstream media outlets because the mainstream media outlets are such potent amplifiers. Once you get your story somewhere like Daily Express or Fox News, you've exponentially increased your reach.
Right.
And this was a case where the tabloids were the main amplifiers of this story. Now, not all of them were entirely naive about it. So some of the reporting in the tabloids was saying this is a bizarre propaganda story, but some of the tabloid reporting was taking it at face value, and that's where that's an instance where early intervention did make a difference, because progressively the tabloids began to walk back the story as the revelation came out that they'd been fooled by a fake. And so that's a case in which being able to demonstrate to them, your story's a fake and we can prove it's a fake because we found the original Facebook post which it was based on and it's not what it claims to be. There is a reputational impact on an outlet which has fallen for that kind of trick. And it was very noteworthy that in this case, Fox News had run the story basing it on the Sun. So Fox News was a second or third order amplifier. When the New York Times got hold of the story, they contacted Fox News and asked them, why did you run this fake story? And Fox News took the story down. They deleted it from their website because of the reputational impact.
But by then it had been shared and had a life of its own.
But by then it had been shared.
Right.
But at least that prevented that you can cauterize the wound at that point. You can say, at least by that channel it's not going to be shared further. But yes, by that point, the spread had been considerable.
Right. And you have another article on the portrait of a botnet. Can I go to that? Yeah, the second page of this article, you talk about the general behavior, the second page. Yes, you talk about the 33 accounts that retweeted the RT News Flash. And the next paragraph, you talk about 7 were either known pro-Russian amplifier accounts or automated news aggregators. Can you just take those two paragraphs and the paragraph at the bottom where you say the behavior patterns are consistent with automated bot accounts, not genuine users, and perhaps explain what you are saying here in this article?
So in this article, A tweet by Russia Today, by RT, caught our attention. It was retweeted 33 times very, very quickly. We looked at the accounts which were doing the retweeting. 7 of them looked like ideological fans of Russia and had a pattern of retweeting RT very quickly. But the other accounts were all, according to their bios, were all purporting to be wearing, flag-waving Donald Trump supporters. The behavior pattern of those apparent Trump supporters was bot-like rather than human. And when I talk about bot-like behavior, the 3 main parameters I look at are activity, anonymity, and amplification. And particularly activity, the simplest indicator of a bot. In general, if you look at an account, calculate the number of times it has posted, it posts on average per day. For an active human user, a rate of activity of up to about 72 posts a day, so one post every 10 minutes for 12 hours, can be considered human. But these accounts were posting in some cases hundreds of times a day for months on end. And an account which is posting hundreds of times a day for months on end is probably automated. If you then look at the kind of stuff it's posting, if all it's doing is posting retweets and never writing its own content, and it's posting hundreds of retweets a day for months on end, then you can be fairly certain that, well, you can definitely call that bot-like behavior, and you can be fairly certain that that is a bot.
And you also say, I think, that many of them take legitimate accounts of normal-looking Americans and then try and pass them off and lie deep, waiting for the right occasion.
That's right. In this particular botnet, the chosen personality, if you like, was a vocal Trump supporter, and so all the biographies matched that. They'd taken photos from other social media accounts, copied them, and used them as their own profile pictures. So they sounded right and they looked right. And this appeared to be an attempt to infiltrate that pro-Trump community. In the case of this particular botnet, what was interesting was that the motivation did not appear to be political, it appeared to be commercial. Because what these bot accounts were doing was sharing all kinds of news stories, but they were sharing them through a URL shortener, which if you clicked on it, would take you to a paid advertising site. So every time you click on that link, the person who set up the link gets a fraction of a cent. So they were monetizing news stories, and the choice of pro-Trump identities appears to match the reporting that we've seen, for example, on the fake news stories, that, if you like, black market tests showed that the Trump community was particularly likely to share tendentious or fake news, and therefore was a better source of clicks and was therefore a better source of revenue. Thank
you. Now we move on to another article, Why Bot Makers Dream of Electric Sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second page, there is a reference to shepherds, sheepdogs, and electric sheep. Can you explain that to us, please?
Yes. So in a large-scale operation to manipulate Twitter traffic, it's usually not enough just to have a large botnet operating, because Twitter is getting good at spotting large-scale botnets. The goal of a manipulation campaign will normally be to generate a very high number of tweets from a very low number of users, because that's the way you make yourself look more important. But rather than just having one person post one tweet and then turning on 1 million bots to amplify it, what we see is a more planned and coordinated pattern of behavior, where you'll get to start with a small number of accounts, typically half a dozen or fewer, which by all indications will be run purely by human beings. They don't retweet much, they post a very high level of individual content, but they will launch a hashtag or a theme or a meme simultaneously, and they will be trying to get a particular message out there. these are the shepherds. These are the ones who are actually launching the campaign. You'll then see a slightly larger group, typically a couple of dozen accounts, which look mostly human, but with quite a high level of activity and with quite a high proportion of retweets, which would appear to be either very active humans or partially automated accounts, and the distinction is blurred. What they will do is then they will amplify everything that the leaders have done, what the shepherds have done. They will take the same hashtag, they will take the same memes or images, and they will, if you like, recombine them. So they'll take the same elements which have been posted, and then they'll post them in slightly different ways. And they will also retweet everything which has been done. And if you like, these couple of dozen accounts are like the sheepdogs. They're trying to steer the traffic. They're not creating it, but they are trying to signal this is what the hashtag is and this is what the content is. And then around that, you will get a medium-sized network of bots, and this would probably be on the order of several hundred or in the low thousands of accounts, which will retweet everything that the shepherds and the sheepdogs have done. And by doing that, you can generate up to 45 or 50,000 tweets in an hour, probably from a group of no more than 6 people. And so it looks like it's a spontaneous movement. The reason that you have this combination of sheepdogs and shepherds is to make it look more like it's just a spontaneous set of human activity. But it's planned in advance, it's coordinated, and the goal is to make it look spontaneous when in fact it's a deliberate operation. But by classifying it as shepherds, sheepdog, and sheep, the idea is to give a better understanding of the complexity and of the need to be able to identify the shepherd accounts in the first instance. You can identify the sheep as a botnet, but botnets are very easy to hire. So even if the botnet is taken down, it'll be easy to just set up a new one. So it's much more important to be able to find the shepherds and work out how they're operating.
Right. You have another article called Botspot, the Intimidators. I think this is one where they attacked your organization and suggested that you yourself might be in trouble. I see your photograph
right
there. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened here?
Okay, I'll try and keep this one brief, but it's quite a lengthy story, so I apologize for that. During our research, we identified, our team identified a network of bot accounts which was being used to harass researchers into Russian disinformation. And we actually came to this through studying the alt-right in the US, and there had been a crossover between the alt-right and Russia in terms of their messaging. So we'd identified that. But we published an article identifying and explaining the botnet which had been used to harass various researchers. And the way the harassment worked was that these bots were being used to massively retweet posts from a given account, which seems counterintuitive, but the effect was that in the course of a couple of hours, that person would see perhaps 23,000 retweets coming into their notifications on Twitter, which is a freaky thing to see. It's a very disturbing thing to see, because normally in this industry, you don't get 23,000 retweets in an hour, unfortunately. And so it was an attempt at intimidation. So we published an article on this, and we identified the botnet. This really annoyed the bot herders, so they created a visual copy of the account of one of my colleagues, and then they created a meme saying that I was dead, and they posted this terribly sad mourning message that I had died that morning, and may I rest in peace. They then copied that to all my colleagues, and then they used 23,000 bots to retweet it. And so again, because we were all copied 23,000 times in a row in our notifications, we got the message that I was dead, which was, it alarmed some of my friends quite a lot. So this then escalated, and bizarrely, various friends of mine started talking about the bot attack that we were under, and then the bots started attacking them as well. And it was an avalanche of bot activity. Anybody who posted on the words DFR Lab, which is my team, and my name, and the words bot attack, would start getting hit by the bots as well. They would get like 2,000 retweets in the first minute. There we go. That's me being dead. And so ultimately, the crudity of this attack was actually its downfall, because we worked out that the bots were attacking anybody who used my name, the DFR lab name, and the words bot attack. And so then I wrote a tweet copied to Twitter support, which is the Twitter unit which takes out bots, using the words bot attack and saying, Twitter support, have you seen what happens when you use the words DFR lab bot attack? And the hope was that the bots would react to this and would retweet it, and each bot that retweeted it using the handle Twitter support would therefore be handing itself into Twitter support. And by the following morning, that tweet had 86,000 retweets. So that was 86,000 bots who had handed themselves into Twitter. And about 75,000 of those accounts were shut down within the next few hours. So in that occasion, we actually, we killed the botnet. But it gives you an idea of the scale of these operations. We estimate that there were about between 185,000 and 200,000 bots being deployed on that day.
It's interesting what technology can do, and some determination. So you rank quite highly in the appreciation of some people.
Apparently.
Yes.
Apparently.
Right.
Normally, getting trolled is normally a sign that you've done something right, and there are times when all of us in this business have been trolled.
Yes.
Trolls don't like being exposed.
Thank you. Now, finally, another article: Election Watch, American bots in South Africa. This is, I think, moving away from Europe and US. South Africa, the recent elections for ANC were also the subject of attacks and manipulation.
That's right, and this was an intriguing example because it was during the selection of the new ANC leader, and we found that one user in particular was getting unnaturally high numbers of retweets very, very fast, which looked on the face of it as if a botnet had been activated. And so we did a machine scan and we looked at the accounts which had been amplifying this black South African political activist. And an awful lot of the amplifiers were, according to their profiles, white Americans from the Midwest, who were mostly, I think, Trump supporters, but certainly not exclusively Trump supporters. And this, just on the face of it, this seemed intrinsically weird. Why would a Midwestern American be amplifying attacks on the ANC leadership? And so, looking at these accounts, it became fairly clear fairly quickly that they were all bots. They were all amplifying the same tweets at the same time. But what was particularly striking was that in each case, in the username of the account, there was one letter which had been replaced by a number. So either an L had been replaced with a number 1, or an O had been replaced with a 0. And if you took that name and you reversed the change so that you replaced the 0 with an O, you came to a real person's account. And the real person's account was identical. It had the same username, it had the same biography, it had the same background picture. And we realized by looking at this that what we had was a network of what looked like commercial bots, but which had been prepared as clones of real human beings. That there was only one letter difference between the bot account and the human account. And we found a couple of hundreds of these. And almost simultaneously, there was a big report in the New York Times about fake followers and how to get them, which identified a US company called Devumi, which has a whole range of bot services which it sells. And the New York Times pointed out that some of these Devumi bots are particularly well presented, and they look exactly like human users, except that the L's are replaced for 1s and the O's are replaced for 0s. So it looks like what we had found in South Africa was certainly similar to, and could well be originated from, Devumi, which is a commercial bot seller in the US. And therefore it looks like what had been happening in South Africa is that somebody had paid for bot services to amplify these political posts from an American provider, presumably on the assumption that nobody would notice, because most people look at a tweet, they just look at the number of retweets. They don't look at where those retweets are coming from. And so this looks like these are bots for the export markets, if you like. They're run from the US, but if you're in South Africa and you need the services of a botnet, you pay and you get them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nimmo. Those are the questions I have for you. I don't know if any other members have any questions.
Hi, Dr. Nimmo. Good afternoon. I have a question with regard to your submission at paragraph 49, and it goes like this: amplification networks are best dealt with by the social platforms. Governments should therefore engage with platforms, especially Facebook and Twitter, to find a means by which networks of false, automated, or inauthentic accounts can quickly be shut down. Just to build on this, Mr. Nim, are you proposing that there should be some sort of legislation to, I wouldn't use the word force, but to get these social networks to take down, it could be bots, it could be accounts very quickly? Is that what you're proposing, or do you have something else in mind?
No, I'm not proposing that. I am very wary of any legislative proposal anywhere in the world which would allow politicians to order the social platforms to change the content on their platform, because the precedent for countries which are hostile to democracy would be very, very alarming. But as a simple example, on the most basic level, it would be find out, effectively set up a hotline. If you see that a large-scale botnet, for example, on Twitter, is amplifying a false story, who do you call at Twitter? Do you know what the procedure is to get hold of Twitter and say, we've seen a botnet? Twitter do an awful lot of automated work cracking down on botnets before they're even set up. And Twitter do a lot of work in identifying botnets on their own, but there are always ones which slip through. And so one of the most effective things to do is to be able to tell Twitter, here's the botnet, this is what it's doing, this is how big it is, deal with it. And the example would be the attack on me and my team last August, where I managed to post a tweet to Twitter support, which then 86,000 bots retweeted, and that botnet was taken offline. I'm thinking much more of practical steps which stop short of legislation. For example, if you have a national crisis response exercise, which is to do with civil disorder or something which could have a fake news component. For example, if you're doing a law and order exercise where the scenario is that rioting breaks out between two ethnic communities, in the scenario these days you are likely to have a social media component. Let's say that the rioting is triggered by a post on one of the social platforms. Then if you're running that exercise, it would be ideal to actually invite the social platforms into the exercise. And while you're gaming out the exercise and you have the national response and you have the police response, you have the law enforcement response, you have the security response, exercise it with the platforms. Get somebody from the platforms there and say, right, let's say that a false video alleging a lynching of one ethnic group by another is going around on YouTube. We know it's false, we can prove it's false, but it's spreading on YouTube, it's being spread on Facebook, it's being spread on Twitter, and it's inflaming sentiment. How do we then work with Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to stop that spread? There are things that the platforms can do. There are ways that they can track, let's say, the spread of a URL through the system, but you have to be able to reach them in real time and say, this is a problem and it's happening right now. It's much more effective to be able to pick up the phone or to send an email to somebody you know in that company and say, this is what's happening, this is why it's important, this is a national security problem, deal with it, rather than trying to invoke legislation. Legislation takes a long time and lasts for a long time. So I would say that in the first instance, do not go down the legislative track, but actually work out how you can work with the platforms on issues of concern, particularly of public order concern, and find what they can do. If you then find that the platforms are not receptive or are not interested or are not engaging, then you can think about whether legislation becomes necessary. But I would always go for legislation as the very last resort. And I would think it would be more effective to go for engagement and working with the platforms to see what can be done quickly and effectively.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shanmugam?
Thank you, Dr. Nimmo. When you are the United States, I suppose you can talk to them. You can understand that maybe other countries, when they talk to these large internet platforms, what if they say no to you, to a country like Singapore? What do we do?
That's when you can start thinking about legislation. Within the territory of Singapore, you are the legislators, you can do that.
Right.
But in terms of flexibility and speed of response, as a first instance, it's much quicker to be able to have, let's say, okay, it's not going to be a red telephone these days, but to have a dedicated contact system whereby in severe cases, you can reach directly to them, whether it be through a branch office in Singapore or a regional branch office.
Right.
That will depend on the setup of each company. But to have some system in place for quick contact, if they then don't appear to respond, then you can say, well, actually, on the territory of Singapore, we're the guys who write the laws. And if necessary, we will and can go down the legislative track. But it's much better not to.
Understand.
Also because in terms of the problem with the internet is that if, let's say, if the video was posted from Singapore, then that's your jurisdiction. If it's posted anywhere else, it's outside your jurisdiction.
Yes.
And it's as soon as you're talking international cooperation to deal with this, it's going to be very slow. So again, having a direct line to the platforms, which is not based on the cudgel of legislation, but based on something more deft and more flexible and more based on cooperation, is probably going to be a quicker response.
Right. Let's look at it this way. On the one side is the problem. There are attackers. We have talked about them without talking about which country. Sophisticated. They attack institutions. They attack ethnic groups, racial groups. They exploit anything that can be exploited to weaken a country and weaken a country's resolve. And there could also be people within the country, some of whom who could do the same for a number of reasons which you have talked about. And society itself is under threat. I think none of this is controversial. You have seen all of this. It can happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now we talk about responses to this situation. One way of approaching it is to say, okay, what is our objective? And I think which approach you take is really a question of philosophy. A balance to be struck between somebody's right to set out and propagate falsehoods on the one hand, because that's what we are talking about. We are not talking about free speech. We are talking about a right to use thousands of bots, to retweet, to shape opinion using technology and falsehoods. So we are not talking about democracy, we are not talking about free speech, we are talking about the very antithesis of free speech. So a right to pursue that kind of behavior balanced against a society's right to protect itself and make sure that there is peace, harmony. Right? So that's how I would put the two concepts. And I think it's a question of which philosophy you prefer. I can understand your perspective that even in that situation, you would rather say the right to do all these things should not be curtailed through legislation. If people want to do that, they can do that. And you try and work with the internet companies to try and stop it. That's your philosophy, right? I mean, that's how I see it.
Okay, I would not actually characterize my philosophy that way, because we've been talking about false information. But as we've seen, it's very seldom that a piece of, let's call it disinformation, is 100% false. If you think even in the Lisa case, the initial reporting from the Russian state outlets was factual. They were saying that here is a girl who is saying that she was abducted and raped. The girl was saying that. She was lying, and it became evident fairly quickly that she was lying, and nevertheless the Russian state outlets ran with it. But at the start, there was a grain of fact in their reporting. And what we see in an awful lot of the falsehoods which are going around online is that they have some core of fact in there, and that makes it extremely difficult to define what is hyper-partisan, what is unbalanced, what is incorrect, what is deliberately false. And in terms of legislating on this, as with any legislation, your definitions are absolutely crucial.
Yes.
But a lot of the work I do on a daily basis is dealing with disinformation and what people call fake news. The working definition I have of disinformation is deliberately spreading false information.
Right.
And I very much like your term, deliberate online falsehood.
Right.
But the problem is, even to use that term disinformation, therefore, means that I have to be able to prove both that the information was false and that it was deliberate.
Right.
That's actually quite a high evidentiary bar to prove that the likelihood is that this person is telling this story knowing that it is false. And there are a very large number of stories where it's a grey area. You can't tell, is the person deliberately making this up, or are they amplifying something they've seen as something else? And then, as Professor Lemonnier was saying, in the case of, for example, the Russian propaganda outlets, they don't often commit outright falsehood. What they will do much more often is they will interview somebody who has inflammatory viewpoints and just let the person talk. They won't even need to ask leading questions because the person is so engaged in their story that they will do it anyway. Now, that is not falsehood. It's biased, it's unprofessional, it's not proper journalism, but it's not false. And so if you are thinking of crafting a law which tells the platforms you have to take down false information immediately when we tell you, well, how are you defining the problem? Are you only looking at false information? That's probably 1% of the problem. Are you looking at information which is mostly false but has a grain of truth in it? That's where it gets problematic. What if the story is 5% true? Is it still a false story? Is it deliberate? What if somebody's citing another website? Are they then doing that deliberately knowing it's false? Or there are so many grey areas here in terms of the spectrum from a story which is 100% made up to a story which is 50% made up to a story which isn't made up at all, but you're only interviewing people from one side of the debate. That your legislation is just the preamble to your legislation is going to be the size of the Oxford English Dictionary.
Well, let's look at the Lisa case. Let's look at the Lisa case.
Yes.
Do you think there was any basis for you say the Russian media, let's stick to the Russian media, continuing to put out a story where the German police have concluded that there was no basis for it, to allow an attack on the German police and effectively undermine people's confidence in the police as an institution in another country through a variety of state channels as well as online channels? Do you think there is a basis for that? And don't you think it is right for Germany or any other country to say, I will not allow it?
I think it's right for. I think the later stages of the Russian reporting were a deliberate attack, and they were intended to inflame. However, the way, if you like, they achieved their effect by leaving things out rather than putting things in.
Right.
So they would interview angry ethnic Russians on the streets of Berlin who were saying, this is terrible and the police were covering it up.
Yes, but
Now, unless you can prove that Anglo-ethnic Russian is
no, you see,
an
there is a
Anglo.
continuum because they kept repeating that there was a rape of a young girl by Middle Easterners and then managed to inflame people and then continue with the consequences of that by going around interviewing others. That's where I'm suggesting to you that a state has every right to stop it early on. And I think, I mean, it's a matter of values, but I think it's entirely justified for a state to intervene and say, this is not allowed. But I can understand if you say no, you take a different view.
Again, the problem is on what grounds you're doing that, because you're absolutely right. They take the story, they take the lie that this girl has told, they report it, that inflames real people, then they go and interview those inflamed real people. The problem is that they are not giving, they're giving equal weight to an angry anonymous Russian on the street and the Berlin prosecutor's office.
Yes.
Now that's a violation of journalistic standards, but it's not. They're not paying actors to do this. They're interviewing real people, and if you like, the important thing is the real people that they're not interviewing. So that would be a case in which there's actually a good precedent, which is the Ofcom, the telecoms regulator in the UK, which is responsible for all kinds of broadcast standards. And that includes the standards, the obligation to preserve due accuracy and due impartiality. Now, due is an important consideration, but I think that if you're going for the legislative track, then that might be a good approach to emulate. Right. That if you say the Russian stories were not technically false, but they were, I think, violations of due impartiality because they gave all this airtime to angry Russians. So if you can phrase it in that way, and if you can say the standards are due accuracy and due impartiality, right, and that's a violation of the standards, then I think that would be a way in which you could practically find an actionable response. If your legislation is going to be based on saying, well, that's false and you can't do it, false is an insufficiently defined term. But if you're going to look at the terms of due accuracy and due impartiality, then that gives you a more solid footing, and it gives you better criteria to determine where the boundaries are.
What has been suggested to us yesterday by somebody else, a professor of law, is that, for example, there are different ways of approaching it. One is you think that there should be a counter to the story, and you don't ask for that to be taken down. You ask them to carry some clarification, which is an alternate view. For example, every time you tweet that the girl has been raped, you've got to also add in that the German police say that this is untrue, and then leave it to the readers to judge for themselves. For example, that's a possibility. But you can only do that through legislation. And so there is no censorship in that sense, but leave it to the readers to judge. The other possibility which was suggested was when it's clearly false, and I think I beg to differ with you in this sense that there are items where it is completely manufactured and totally untrue, which is legally very easily identifiable. And you ask for it to be taken down, but you give an opportunity to the other side to then come and perhaps deal with at a neutral tribunal that in fact it is not false. I mean, these are things that one has got to think through, but I understand where you're coming from. And I think that will give you a better sense that legislation may not necessarily just be one solution. There might have to be different solutions for slightly differentiated outcomes.
I think that makes sense. And if you have the more nuance you build in, or the more acceptance of nuance you build in, the better. For example, if you can if you can prove that a video which purports to be of a riot in Singapore today was actually filmed in Catalonia 10 years ago, then you've got a very solid case of saying that that is 100% false. And once you have something which is 100% false and can only have been done deliberately, then you have a much stronger basis on which to act.
Yes.
I think the idea of obliging people to carry the other side of the story is quite interesting and actually dovetails with the idea of due impartiality, because in the case of the UK, the idea of due impartiality is that you have to give adequate space to significant voices. It doesn't have to be a 50-50 split, but somewhere in your report, let's say if you are commenting on a criminal case happening in Berlin, then it is legitimate to argue that the point of view of the Berlin prosecutor's office is a significant voice. And if you are leaving out that voice entirely, you've just violated journalistic standards. So, and you're not doing your job properly. So at that point, if you're going to have legislation which says you must have due impartiality, and if you're not going to do it, then the legislators have the right to say that this was not duly impartial and therefore it needs to include this particular voice, then that is a way forward. The one caveat I would throw in there is that for Ofcom, it normally takes between 2 and about 6 months for them to come to a decision on a particular story.
Yes.
So you need to be able to find a way of making this operational in real time rather than sometime next year.
Thank you very much.
And you're welcome.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? No. Okay. There are no further questions. Mr. Nimmo, thank you very much for taking time to participate and for your contributions to the Select Committee process. The next few days, we'll send you a transcript of today's proceedings. Please go through it, and if there are any corrections to be made, please correct them and send it back to us. And thank you very much once again from the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, we have finished taking evidence from witnesses scheduled for today. Are there any other matters? No, if there are none, I adjourn the proceedings till tomorrow, Friday, 16th of March, 2018 at 10 a.m. Please note that the public hearings will begin at 12 noon. Thank you.